In this series of videos we're looking at efficiency in Python programming with the aim of addressing this syllabus criteria, part of your practical programming project control assessment, so how to annotate evidence showing that your solution has been coded efficiently. So in this video we're looking at this item on my list, so avoiding repetition of code. So the most obvious example of this is a basic program where I need the user to enter numbers, and each time they enter a number I'm going to add it to the total. So I might do something like total equals total plus int input, give me a number. So I'm sure all of you are aware that it would be completely inefficient to write this program. So say I wanted 10 numbers. This is not a good example of efficient programming. So by all means this program will work. So the idea is that each time the user inputs a number, it adds it onto the total, and then we print the total at the end. So this will work, but there's quite clearly a better way to be doing this. So let me just load the shell. So we've established that the program works. There we go. But you all by now should know that the more efficient way to do this is to simply put it in a for loop. So again, it's the same solution, but this time this is just a better method of programming. So we're now going to look at another example of where it would be a good idea to avoid repetition of code. So this is a program where the user chooses from a main menu whether they want to enter an address, a name, or a telephone number. Then based on that choice, what the program does is they enter the data, it performs a length check and prints a message based on the length of the data entered. So just to see this in action, so for example, if what we're going to do is type in an invalid length address, I'm going to choose 1 to enter the address, and I'm just going to type in 123, and it tells me the address was too short. We'll run it again. This time I'm going to choose name, enter Bob Smith, and it should tell me that the name is fine. Okay. So the problem here is that a very similar kind of sequence of steps is happening in all three branches of my kind of menu conditional statement. So if the choice is 1, we input some data, we perform an if and an elif length check, and then otherwise we print a message. So we can see this kind of repetition happening. So there's a better way if you kind of think about generalizing the way that you're writing your code, and you will end up with a much more kind of elegant solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take I'm going to remove this for now, and I'm going to change what's in the body of my statement, and I'm going to try and kind of generalize this last little bit, so the actual processing of the data. So rather than entering a telephone number, I'm going to just give it a kind of general name, so input value, and I'm going to then replace the references to the variable names, and I'm going to change some other bits. So I'm going to actually use the .format method here and pass in a variable called input name. I'm going to do that for each of these things. So the idea is that when I run the code, rather than this being one instance for telephone number, one instance for name, one instance for address, it's going to be able to do it with whatever the user has chosen. I'm also going to use a variable to store this, so I'm going to call that max length, and this is going to be min length. So the only bit of code that's going to need it there as well. The only bit of code that's going to need to be placed inside the conditional statement are these variables getting assigned values. So the only thing that changes is the fact that they might have different values. So if the user enters choice 1, then they're looking for the address, or they're looking to input an address. If they choose choice 2, they're looking to input a name. And if they choose choice 3, they're looking to input a telephone number. Sorry. And the other thing that changes was these values, so max length and min length. So I'm going to copy. So again, it's slightly repetitive again, but there's less code that is going to be repeated. So I can't even remember what I set. So max length of address is 25. These are just arbitrary values. So I'm going to say in the context of this program, you cannot have a name less than 3 characters. You cannot have a name more than 15. Telephone number, so without the area code, could be 7. And the maximum length is going to be 12, maybe. Okay, and the last thing is, so the input value, so regardless of what they choose here, they're always going to input some data, so therefore that's going to be outside of the conditional statement. And regardless of what data they enter, we're still performing the same processing. We're still checking whether the data is longer than a certain length, whether the data is shorter than a certain length, or otherwise then the data must be fine. One problem is this else statement, so I'm not going to be able to put my else down here. So this is where I'm going to have to actually implement a little bit of data validation. So I'm going to initialize choice to something. I'm going to say while the choice not in my valid list of options, which is either 1, 2, or 3, then not very user friendly, but I'm just going to repeat the menu to them. So choice is initialized to a blank string, and then I'm just going to loop over. So have a look in my robustness videos for more explanation of this. So now hopefully if the code gets to this point, then choice must be either 1, 2, or 3 for the loop to have been exited. So then based on whether they choose 1 or 2 or 3, the variables get assigned values, and then we can then run through the final bit of processing. Let's have a look to see if it still works. I'm going to test a phone number this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8. This should be an 11-digit number, so it should be valid. Okay, and then just test one more time. This time with an invalid length telephone number, and it works. Okay. So the main thing here is that this is a more elegant way of writing code where you're using variables in a most efficient way, and you're making code a lot more readable. So I'm just going to go through one last little thing. Once again, I'm importing the datetime library, and I'm going to record the time before and after the program's finished executing. Therefore, we can work out how efficient each version is. I think it's important at this point to not start recording the duration until after the choice has been input, so you can see on both programs to make it a fair test. That's what I've done. So I'm going to measure the original version first, again using the same test data, so just 3 and 1, 2, 3. So you can see that took this amount of time. Now I'm going to switch to the newer version, the hopefully more efficient version, and run the same test. And we can see it took under half as much. So again, writing code in this way is a much more efficient style of programming.